Welcome back to the show with our guest, John Blackley from John Blackley Architect. Now, John, just before we went to the break, we were talking about tendering and comparing tenders and all that sort of stuff. Just to tie the first, 20 minutes of today's show, we talked about documents and tendering. Now, the one thing we haven't really spoken about is PC and provisional sums. Sure. Generally, obviously, when things aren't documented too well or haven't been thought about. Yep. And now, just when the tenderer prices them, now what are some of the pitfalls clients and architects need to look out for?
Well, architects try and avoid prime costs and provisional sums where we can, but sometimes there's just not enough time to make a decision about something. You can, years ago, prime cost used to be for this. For the supply of a particular object. It might be $1,000 for an oven or something without having picked the oven. Correct. Or provisional sum might be supply and install tiles, $10,000, etc., etc. So
just what are the pitfalls like?
Well, why it's important to have good set of documents, and good set of documents includes no provisional sums or, in other words, guesswork kind of things. So the pitfalls are that the provisional sum isn't accurate enough, and there has been some government legislation about that. Builders are supposed to be within 10% of that number.
Oh, I wasn't totally. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, that's a resident. 10% of the thing. So if you put in a provisional sum of $5,000 for a kitchen. And then the builder has allowed only $5,000 in his price, and then the owner says, "Well, we've now decided which one. It's X, Y, Z," and the builder says, "Oh, well, that one's $10,000, so that's $5,000 extra or variation, and you don't really want that." But now the builder's got to be within 10% of that thing.
And is it liable for the difference, so to speak? Is that?
I think that's generally the case, but I do try and avoid them. But sometimes you can't avoid them. So.
Well, that's a good. Now that's kind of leads us into the final part of the show where we talk about contracts. Obviously, I didn't realise the provisional sums. There's a new legislation, but just for the benefit of the viewers at home, we'll talk about what's in a basic contract. Well, first of all, what types of contracts and where do they come from?
Sure. Well, 99% of contracts are lump sum contracts. In other words, Bob the builder says he'll build your house for $200,000, and that's it, subject to variations and that kind of thing.
The common ones for a residential.
It's not $200,000. Oh, by the way, it's a lot more difficult than I thought. It's going to take longer. It'll be $300,000. So they're all lump sum contracts, and all contracts are subject to Queensland government legislation. So there might be different bodies that sell them. There might be the HIA, the Queensland Master Builders, QMBA, or the QBSA, Queensland Building Services Authority, or the Institute of Architects.
Which is the RAIA.
Royal Australian Institute of Architects, RAIA. But all of the residential contracts that the RAIA sell involve an architect. There's specific things about an architect. But also it's endorsed by not only the Institute of Architects, but the National Master Builders. So
and this is where I'll come into it. This is no disrespect for the QMBA or QBSA, but where they lack is the provisions for the client withholding retentions, so to speak. And can we just go through the contracts? We're kind of running out of time for today's show. Just we'll talk about retentions and extensions of time.
Well, in an architect-administered contract, as in commercial buildings, some money is retained. If the builder's done $100,000 worth of work, then you might hold back 5% or 10% of that, so $90,000, and that sum bills until halfway through the contract, and that's changed to 5%. And then at the end of the defects, when the building's built, then 2.5% goes back to the builder. So 2.5%, say $2,500 in a $100,000 job, that's retained by the owner for the defects liability period, which can be anywhere between 3 months and 12 months usually. And that's to make sure the builder comes back and fixes anything up that's a problem.
And also just what we want to discuss with you there, John, is just in the contract itself. You know, provisions to deal. What are the important things in the contract, like to do with variations, EOTs, and insurances? Yeah, can we just go through a bit of a
sure
talk about a bit of a list of them? Yep.
Yep. Well, insurance, very important. Insurance, the builder's usually expected to cover all insurances, whether it's public liability or they usually do an all risk, you know, with Queensland Master Builders or someone like that. That's very important. Once the architect decides on which builder, then we say, well, first thing before you start work is show us that you've covered it for insurance.
Sure. I provide public liability, as you said, which encompasses contract works and also workers' comp is a separate one.
Yep.
But sometimes it gets a little bit tricky where clients need to know is when you're doing a renovation extension, who's covering the existing part of the house that doesn't get renovated.
Yes.
That's generally a bit of a grey area.
It is.
Yep.
Well, you might notice on the one you priced for me recently, I did say to insure the existing house.
Yep.
But we always advise clients to speak to their broker and tell them exactly what's happening so there's no surprises. So contracts are generally about money and time.
Yep.
So if there's more work involved, if you change your mind about something, well, it's probably going to cost more money and it's probably going to cost more time. And then the architect's role is like the umpire, and we go, well, that's a fair enough extra money, or that's a fair enough extra time.
Yep. Yeah, so because that's another point where viewers might, you know, decide that they'll administer the contract themselves, and they can fall into a bit of trouble, so to speak, with an architect who's normally administers a contract. They're usually impartial and, you know, quite, you know, fair and reasonable to both parties.
Yes.
Yep. We really like to go into contracts, but you as an architect, John, and me as a builder, we may upset some of the legal eagles who might be listening to this show or watching this show. And so if you've got any questions about contracts, it's probably best to email them and we'll get a legal person to answer them, because we're not 100%, you know, okay to answer too many legal questions because we might get in trouble. But on next week's show, we're going to go further into talking about the construction process and all the goings on during that phase. And in the meantime, you can follow us on Facebook. Just look up Renovations for Beginners, or email the show, renovationsforbeginners@gmail.com. John, thank you for being part of the show.
Thank you.
And until next time, dream it, plan it, build it.